Hey, good morning.
Good morning. The Paris prosecutor is saying.
Good morning.
Tropical storm Irma is tearing into the impeachment hearings.
Between the U.S. and China is rocking.
Killed.
Flames.
Horrific.
Deadly.
Bombing.
Good morning, world.
Good morning, world.
Good morning, world.
Good morning, world. Welcome to beautiful, sunny old Kaikoura.
This afternoon I'm going to go hang out by the lake, grab a coffee. So wherever you are, I hope you have a good day.
Sending your chilled out vibes to wherever you are.
Have a great day.
You know, a little welcome from us to you.
Good morning, world. I'm here on my farm with Charlie, my favourite duck. I grow wine, I grow my beard. It's a beautiful place to be.
Good morning, world! Good morning, world. Overlooking Lake Rotorua, just about to have my morning bath.
We're about to go down 60 Rapids. Wherever you are in the world, have a great day.
I hope you're enjoying your morning. Quiet, thank you. Wherever you are, have a great day out there in the world.
So yeah, cheer. I'll see you soon.
I hope you have an amazing day wherever you are. Come on.
Welcome back to Voices of Effectiveness. We've had a little bit of a lull in recordings, but that's because we've all been terribly busy moving and transitioning from deep lockdown into kind of returning to the office. And so we thought we'd give people a little bit of a breathing space and also let our audience recover from the gobsmackingly interesting content that they'd seen in the first 3 episodes. And we're hoping to follow up with that today. I'm delighted to be able to have a wee correro with Rory Gallery from Special, Head of Planning at Special. I hope I've got your title correct. Grand Poobah Strategy, yes?
You have,
yes. And then Brodie, Grand Poobah Marketing Director, New Zealand Tourism.
Kia ora.
It's wonderful to have you guys along because today we're going to be talking about a really wonderful campaign that it's been noticed, but largely noticed and experienced overseas because, of course, before COVID, we were building the brand New Zealand to the rest of the world, as we've done very successfully as a country, and this was the latest effort to do that, I guess. This is the campaign called Good Morning World. I think I've got that right. Good morning, world. And we wanted to find out the story of effectiveness behind the story of the campaign. And so it's great to have both Brodie. We're building off the innovation that we had when we looked at sustainable with ASB and with Collective, where we actually thought, why don't we talk to a client? And they didn't disgrace themselves. So Brodie's promised to be terribly well behaved through the conversation. So it's fantastic to have you along, Brodie, and it's brilliant to have both sides of the partnership talking about the work. So I think, Brodie, if I can start with you, can you describe kind of the challenge and kind of what lay at the heart of the brief that you took to Special and sort of knocked on Rory's door with?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Murray. So I guess we're, from a Tourism New Zealand perspective, we were in a position where we had spent a long time promoting New Zealand based on our beautiful landscapes and scenery. And we were at that point where we sort of looked at everything we were doing, looked at our competition, and realised that actually everything that we were doing was exactly what our competition was doing. And you can imagine it's quite an irrational decision to decide to choose a holiday to New Zealand. You know, you spend a lot of your money, a lot of your annual leave, fly in some cases 24 hours around the world, And when that, when the option of and what you're promoting is essentially showing exactly what you could get from a 3-hour plane ride and half the half the cost, it becomes really, really hard to convince people that that's a good idea to do that. So we sort of took a bit of a hard look at ourselves and said, okay, we need to reframe what New Zealand stands for. We need to build more depth into our story, and we need to make it more than just about the landscapes and scenery, because as a nation we have so much more to offer than that. So we went to the team at Special and said, look, we're trying to tell a deeper story here. We're trying to talk about our people, our culture, the activities that you have to do alongside our beautiful landscapes and scenery. And we want to make sure we're doing that, in a really real way. And we need to do that across 14 markets, different cultures. There's quite a lot of, I'm sure Rory can remember the checklist of criteria to answer the brief.
Well, I'm starting to remember now. Sorry about that.
Yeah. There was a lot of complexity, I guess, to the brief and to the problem, but at its heart is, how can we tell a more unique and distinctive story about who we are and what we stand for, as a nation, in order to get people to fall in love with New Zealand and therefore convert that into a ticket to come here. But that was really the brief in a nutshell.
You've got a bunch of sort of challenges here, haven't you? Which is sort of Tourism New Zealand had reinvented how you market a country, but everyone had sort of caught up. So, I see your mountains, I see your Southern Alps, and I raise them. Yeah. And, I see your 24-hour flight, and I shorten it to 6 hours. And so that sort of erodes your point of difference, and you're seeking a way to refresh the appeal of New Zealand. But you've also got this challenge, and I think this is what's going to be really interesting about this, and this is what makes the campaign so bold and ambitious, is you've got this multi-market dimension. And how do you, the cleverness of the solution around actually being able to be fit for markets that are so diverse, but are so important for New Zealand's sort of tourism economy and industry.
Yeah, what works in one market doesn't necessarily work in another. Yes. And we found that at the hard way, over a number of years, by developing one piece of beautiful brand content that we expected to one size fits all approach. And what we kept hearing back from our markets is, that was great in Australia and the UK and kind of great in the US, but it didn't resonate at all in China and Southeast Asia. So we had to relook at the model and the approach.
Okay. And so, Rory, can I turn to you now and say, having got your long checklist from Brodie, we want the world, literally. And here's the checklist. How did you guys respond to that? And what was the genesis of your thinking in starting to answer the brief?
I think, to be honest, first of all, I should probably say that this is probably going to expose me as not having done very much in terms of strategy. Because I think Brodie isn't quite necessarily doing justice to the brief that we were given. Because I guess if I was to sum it up, the brief that we got was to talk about the people and place, so the people of New Zealand as well. And it was quite a sort of important bit in the brief around the idea and concept of Manaakitanga and the Maori concept of, I guess, being welcoming and respectful towards visitors. So when we got the brief, I guess for me, because part of this is that I'm doing this as a strategist, part of it is that I'm doing it as, if I'm being honest, I'm still a tourist in this country. I could barely find my way to the airport if you asked me to jump in the car. So I guess one of the things that I have experienced in my time is the sort of unique welcome that you get in New Zealand. And to just give my own personal example of that, ever before I arrived at Special Group, I had this package sent to my in-laws, and they sent me a picture when I was still in Ireland over the Christmas period of the package. And it was full of things like, everything an Irish person might need to sort of settle into New Zealand. So obviously there was things like sun cream, the beers of choice of a New Zealander, history books, my laptop, all sorts of useful things. And I guess really for me, it was a good example of the kind of welcome that you get here. And of course, I've experienced loads of other things, like my friends, people that I barely knew, I should probably say, bringing me to a batch or, to a weekend away. So I guess we really bought into the idea of, the welcome that you get from the people. It is actually quite unique. And there was a few examples of that we kicked around with Brodie and her team. One of them is the story of Ed Sheeran going around to Jacinda's house for a cup of tea, which, Theresa May was the Prime Minister at the time, and we kind of said we just couldn't really imagine Theresa May inviting Lord around for a cup of tea in Downing Street. I think sort of the other amazing story was the story of the All Black players inviting the British and Irish Lions fan, their mother, inviting the fan to stay at their house, and then he wakes up the next day and realizes that he's in the house but in All Black. I just don't really think you get stories like that in many countries. I would love to be biased and say you get it in Ireland, but I do think it is something quite unique to New Zealand. And it was quite interesting. It was actually a conversation with my mother-in-law where she said to me that one of the reasons that New Zealanders kind of do go to such great lengths is they kind of recognize the distance that people have come to and the sort of challenge it is to get here. So if they're going to come here, you're going to make sure they have a good time.
It's a bloody long way to come for a crap time, isn't it?
It is. It is. So I guess really when we kind of crystallized the insight around that, it was this idea that Kiwis go to ridiculous lengths to ensure that people feel they're warm and welcome in nature. I guess kind of where it became a little bit more challenging though is that, and I guess this was a key part of it, it's one thing having that as an insight, but it's not necessarily just a creative message that you can put out into the world. That you can't just say that you're really welcoming. You kind of need to make people feel it. So I guess really when we kind of were getting into creative development, the brief was, well, that's the insight, but actually the creative ideas need to very much that we developed, because we developed a number of different creative ideas, very much need to actually demonstrate that we are warm and welcoming, not just say it. So that was one aspect. The other aspect is that I guess, having spent a number of years in the UK prior to being in New Zealand, I guess it was ingrained in my brain around the idea of creating long-term campaign ideas. We know that they're much more effective. So I guess one of the other challenges really was, well, how are we going to ensure that this isn't just a one-off? So it was kind of interesting because on the one hand, you're asking for a campaign that sort of ensures that people can feel New Zealanders welcome, but on the other hand, we needed a core idea that was kind of an expression of that. So it's quite interesting because for us, absolutely Good Morning World is the name of that campaign, but for us, it's a much bigger thing because we evolved 100% Pure, which has had different iterations in the past, such as 100% Middle Earth, 100% You. We evolved it to be 100% Pure Welcome, 100% Pure New Zealand. And I think that's a really important part of it because for me, Good Morning World is a great campaign idea that comes off that core idea. But for us, I guess the moment that we all kind of felt like we were onto something was when we realized that we could actually express it as being something that was a core idea that also had longevity beyond a one-off campaign. That's
important because it could have been all too easy to respond to this brief by, I suppose, throwing out the past and that part of long-term brand building is consistency, and it's knowing how to blend a refreshed expression of the same thing. And I think what this cleverly does is it allows you to add an extra dimension to a core idea that people are already so familiar with. And it's been established for like 20 years now, hasn't it, or something?
Yeah, 20 years last year.
Yeah.
One of the really interesting things, Murray, when you look back to across the evolution of that 20-year history is when 100% Pure New Zealand, at its inception in 1999, it was always multi-dimensional. It was always about people and landscapes and activities and culture.
Yep.
So if you go back to the heart of it, that's how it originated. And over time, it is when it evolved and changed and got to where it was. And the turning point, if you kind of look back on it, is when we took this incredible film franchise, and we became 100% Middle Earth. Now, what that did at that time, and it was absolutely the right thing to do, because it sort of took us from nowhere and no one to propelling us onto the stratosphere of tourism destinations. But at that moment in time, and by doing that, because we were 100% Middle Earth, we were about mystery, fantasy, hobbits. We removed the people and the culture and the realness from 100% pure. And post that 100% Middle Earth campaign, we never really got that back. We continued just with this beautiful landscape and this beautiful scene. Yes. And that really meant that we lost a lot of that uniqueness and that, the points of differentiation, as you said at the start, because then we just started to look like every other destination.
Yeah.
But it's, it's interesting to go back and look at the evolution, because at its core, it was always about the people and the culture and
often it's going back to your DNA, isn't it? And go, what was the original intent of the idea? And it's very easy to just track off course through tactics and opportunities come along. And you're absolutely right. I mean, one couldn't pass up that opportunity, but it ultimately just concentrated you on one expression of the core idea, landscape.
Absolutely.
And backdrop and all the physical attributes of New Zealand.
And when you talk to visitors, that have been here, they go, I came because I wanted to see those, amazing, the amazing mountains and those amazing lakes. I'd heard, about Lord of the Rings and what it was like. But what they actually leave talking about is the warmth of the welcome of the people. That's what they become advocates for New Zealand, over. And they talk about this feeling of kind of leaving with a little piece of New Zealand in their heart. And that's because of the warmth of the welcome they've received and how they've been looked after in the time that they're here.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that was like, it's interesting because there's multiple stages of a brief where there's a real challenge. And I think what Brodie just said to me, that is like a real truth about the people that come here and leave. That's how they feel. But how do you kind of bottle that and take that to the rest of the world who haven't been? I'm kind of talking like that's probably what I said sort of like 2 years ago or whenever it was when we were obviously having our sort of pitch meetings. And I guess for me, you can't just tell the world that. And the brief wasn't just to come up with an advertising campaign. It was very deliberate in its idea of trying to demonstrate this through some form of gesture or initiative. And I think that was a really important part of how we got to the next stage.
Yeah.
As Pania from Māori Tourism often tells me, a kumara never speaks of its own sweetness. So, how do you deliver that essence of the sweetness without telling people, how sweet, how warm and welcoming and wonderful we are.
Yes, yes. And it's often, it reflects the way you phrase that. I think, Roy, you mentioned it, sort of how do you bottle it? That's often a conversation you have with clients when they go, when we talk to our most passionate advocates, if they feel like this, and if we could just bottle that and put it in the advertising, that would solve everything. And you often hear that. It's like that's often Tom's has to solve that, which is like, but how do you do that without being really clunky and telling people what to feel? And it's so much more complex than that, even though the intent is correct. But it's
absolutely.
It's fascinating. So
it can come across as arrogant or like you say, kind of we're telling you what to do or how to feel.
New Zealand, we're so welcoming. Well, yes. So Rory, can I flick to you then and ask you about then the evolution of the creative solution? So you had those because you had that wonderful, and again, I was talking to Dan West when we were talking about This Girl Can, and part of the process of just trying to really distill it down to that core insight. But that's just a means to an end. So what happened next in the story?
Yeah, because that's always the messy bit, isn't it? Everyone kind of paints it out as if it's some sort of like beautiful, simple process. You know what? It was actually less messy than most, if I'm being honest. One of the reasons was because I think we had very clearly established, I guess, the insight, but as I said, the type of work that we were trying to do. So we kind of had like our checklist of these are the things that it needs to do. So we had Brodie and her team's checklist, then we had our own checklist. We kind of went away over a number of days, took ourselves out of the office and worked in it. And we actually came to a number of different creative solutions quite quickly. Good Morning World was one of them. But I guess what's kind of interesting is that when you're seeing quite a lot of ideas, and there was a lot of good ideas as well, it was interesting because that one wasn't necessarily the one everyone pointed to straight away and was like, it has to be that. That's the only one that we could make. Yeah. So I guess for me, kind of getting to the concept was not really the tricky bit. I feel like we got there quite quickly, but I guess it was more then about the creative development and what you kind of needed to go through. Because one of the things was, of course, particularly being a government entity, you've got to research this in lots of markets. Secondly, you kind of start to think about all of the different markets, and well, actually, they've got quite a lot of different requirements around things like barriers, the kind of activities that they're into. And when you started sort of thinking about that, that kind of means that you end up looking at some of the ideas slightly differently. And I guess what we were sort of beginning to realize about Good Morning World is that on the one hand, it was this lovely welcoming gesture that, we thought could make a great campaign for Tourism New Zealand. But the other thing about it is that it was actually incredibly flexible. It's called something differently everywhere. I think it's called a donut here. When I was growing up in planning in Ireland, it was called an empty belly. That kind of idea of a retail ad that you can kind of just put whatever you want in the middle. When we were kind of going around to different markets, talking to them about the idea, the way we kind of described it to them is that it was a bit like an empty belly, which was, you have to say good morning at the start. You need the people to be kind of warm, welcoming, nice people. And then you kind of need to say something at the end that is kind of somewhat inviting. But other than that, you can talk about fishing, kayaking, surfing, or whatever it may be. Yeah. So I guess in terms of what happened next, I think it was more really about just sort of gradually kind of realizing the reality of developing a campaign for 14 markets for a tourism brand and what that kind of idea needs to do. And I guess the more that I saw it, the more I realized, you really needed quite a strong content idea. Lots of people reference the Call Sweden campaign in tourism. I'm not sure if you've seen that as the idea of, anyone can call Sweden. That did a very good job getting PR. I actually personally rang it myself. But, it does work, kids. It does work. But it didn't necessarily do a very good job of telling you very much about Sweden and the activities, etc. And I guess for me, what I'm trying to sort of say is that there was a journey that we went on that kind of gradually made us realize that and sort of gravitate towards this idea, including the fact that it researched very well. I guess there's just one other thing that I'd kind of add to it, which is one of the things that we're often asked is, how is this unique? And I'm not just talking about tourism, I'm talking about every client. It's quite a legitimate question to ask. And I guess one of the reasons why it was very unique is that New Zealand's place in the world means that, well, they are one of the first countries to wake up. And because of that, it did actually just enable us to kind of look at it and go, you know what, there's really not many other people that could ever emulate this or do this. Yeah. So for that alone, it just sort of gave it a really nice sort of reason to again gravitate towards it. And for me, we still had some lovely other creative ideas on the table that I'd happily do tomorrow. But when you kind of start looking through all of the different factors, it just kind of felt like there couldn't have really have been a better answer in my mind.
And that's, I think, just to pause on that, I think that's a really important part of reviewing creative concepts and thinking about the task in hand. And it is often easy to get carried away with the one that you think could be the most original or could be the most, PR worthy or whatever, but actually you've got to think about the task at hand. And there is a practical, I did a lot of work with Air New Zealand at FCB, and we spent a lot of time doing destination advertising, and we used to have multiple variants and for different segments, and it all gets terribly complicated. But it's important because you've got to try and allow that flexibility of appeal and message, and you've got to be guided by audiences and markets to do that. Otherwise, you just end up creating these redundant assets that probably make the marketing team feel great and the people that produced it, but they don't create any traction in the market, and that's the ultimate.
I think that's a great point. And look, I've done a few sort of global brands in my time, and one of the biggest challenges is getting the markets to feel like that they own it too. And I think in this case, they really did. Every market kind of took it on and made it their own. Everyone had an input because obviously, we had 365 bits of content we needed to fill. So everyone had a chance to tell us about what the top activities were, about the nuances that we needed to consider. And I think that really helped to galvanize the entire organization behind the idea.
And for people who may not have seen the campaign, can you just explain how it works, just at that sort of mechanical level? Because it's for 365 days and then it's across 14 markets. Can you just step it out for those that have probably heard about it but not really got into how it works? Yeah.
So the creative idea, Good Morning World, essentially it was a different New Zealander saying good morning to the world every single day for an entire year in sort of video format. And that obviously would play out very differently depending on said market. And that essentially meant that every single day you got to see a New Zealander in either their favorite spot or an interesting location or cooking some interesting food in a restaurant, and they'd talk to you about they'd say good morning, they'd talk to you about what they're doing and sort of wish you a very good day, and of course give a little gentle invite down to New Zealand. And obviously then at the very end, 100% welcome, 100% pure New Zealand will come up on each of the frames. Then in terms of the specific markets and how it actually manifests itself, we kind of had a sort of, I guess, global hub, but the reality is that different markets would take different things to promote. Because as a viewer, you don't need to see 365 films to get the idea. You could actually only see one or two or a handful of them, but it was very clearly signaled in each of the films that this was something that was happening over the course of the year. It's quite obvious from looking at it. So I think whether or not you engage with every last one of them, the strategy behind it is that you realize that there was a massive effort and gesture on behalf of New Zealanders happening.
Sorry, Brad.
From our side, I was just going to say, it was 365 or 366 actually, because it was a leap year, but 366 reasons to visit New Zealand, and it kind of did the job on all of the layers. If you think about dreaming about a holiday, planning a holiday, and then actually booking that holiday, and then turning up and visiting. It was really sort of lovely and emotional at that top, kind of dream layer. But then when you went into our global channels, there was 365 things that you could put on your itinerary when you came here. So it sort of worked across all of the different layers of the consumer journey as well. And building on what Rory said, we had a kind of global layer where a different Good Morning World every single day for 366 days. But the markets were able to pick and choose from all of that content as to what they thought was going to resonate for them, because there's specific booking windows in market, whereby, for instance, in the UK, October, November in January, February are two really key booking windows. So they would over-index on their, paid campaigns in those booking windows and pick the 20, 30, 40 Good Morning Worlds that were going to resonate, most effectively with their markets, whilst we were still running the overall global channels on the daily. So this year, huge flexibility. The markets did, co-create it with us and sort of told us exactly what they wanted to be featured. and it allowed us to also be quite topical throughout the year as well. So, you know, Mother's Day, World Pinot Noir Day, you know, Children's Day, you know, we did all sorts of fun things that gave us a little bit more, you know, PR ability throughout the year as well. So
that's great. So could I turn to in terms of setting up measures of success, because you were clearly, you did a lot of work to define almost kind of what would be the style of the solution, because it couldn't just be saying it needed to be flexible, it had to work multi-market, that was all kind of there. And in terms of the measures of success for the campaign, so at what point were those discussed, and how did you measure success ultimately?
So I think that there's a couple of things, because I guess for me, when you usually start off in a brief like this, there's kind of like what are the brand's objectives, and they don't necessarily mean like monetary ones. It's more like, what are we trying to do as a brand? And I think sort of, you know, we've kind of discussed up front what we're actually trying to do. Then sort of post kind of, I guess, beginning to develop the campaign, there was another campaign idea on the table as well. We actually sat down and kind of created this sort of strategic blueprint, which kind of had on a global level, what were the sort of big objectives that we were trying to hit.
Yep.
So from memory, I guess, driving sort of brand fame was the first one, because you got to start with awareness. And then affinity was the next one, consideration, so on and so forth. And so I think it was about sort of 6 in total.
Yeah.
I guess from a measurement perspective, the truth of it is that the campaign only actually finished 2 days ago. So we've kind of measured this in a few different ways, in the sense of we've kind of done what happened up front. We've kind of been monitoring it across the year. And I guess currently right now is that I'm kind of trying to look at the 6 objectives in total, kind of seeing how we're actually doing against them. But I guess one of the points that I did want to make is, it's not, you don't always have campaign objectives. For some reason, it happens a lot of the time where people don't actually set them. I think we had a very clear set of objectives up front, documented, which were the global objectives. But then in that same blueprint, we enabled markets to be able to talk about what were the other objectives that they might have. Because obviously, you know, within some of the markets, they might have, for example, more rational barriers that they need to overcome. Yep. And it would be an objective to kind of move those in some shape or form.
Yep.
So I think when it comes to a global brand in particular, you need to be very clear on what the objectives are, but you also need to be flexible enough to enable different markets to come to the table with what their objectives are. Because trying to set up one coherent measurement across 14 or 15 countries is an extremely tricky thing.
It reminds me of kind of when Mark Ritson came to talk back in February, and he was talking about his analysis of the FEs worldwide, 50 years worth of FE data, and he was talking about having a kind of handful of, you know, the right number of objectives. You know, Peter Field's work and Les Binet's work bears this out as well, is that the notion of one metric to rule them all is naive, and you are going to need a balanced scorecard of objectives, and actually campaigns that have multiple objectives tend to be more effective, largely because people are thinking through the sort of chain of effectiveness, and so they kind of know what those things look like. It's probably evidence of people actually engaging with effectiveness right at the front, so they're predisposed to be more effective. But I think that's a really good point you make about, again, I can remember from my Air New Zealand experience, we would always have kind of the overarching approach. Funnily enough, we did one-page blueprints as well. It was like, you know, what are we ultimately trying to achieve for brand Air New Zealand? And then what does it mean for Singapore? What does it mean for, you know, West Coast America? What does it mean, you know, and so on and so forth. But you were always holding those markets accountable and measuring and creating feedback loops so that you knew how you were.
So for example, if you could sort of talk about, you know, driving affinity, that can be measured in many different ways in different markets, as long as you were all trying to measure that. So that's just like one example of it. So broadly speaking, we absolutely did have objectives in play, and as I sort of said, in terms of how we measure, I mean, tourism have got a great access to lots of sort of insights and data about campaign performance, brand performance, etc. I can kind of talk loosely to how it's done to date.
If you feel comfortable, you don't have to, but if you're able to just give people a sense of.
Yeah, I guess this was something that I only kind of found out the other day, which is amazing. But it was kind of interesting in different markets. Obviously, you know, some have been better than others, but the good news is that they've all been really good. I guess across all of the markets, from a brand metric perspective, we've seen great results across appeal, across the number of people that are considering New Zealand, across intention to book. Now, obviously, I know the borders are closed right now, but as you know, brand metrics are something that tends to take quite a long time to actually move. And also, they're something that take quite a long time to go downward as well. So for us, it's really important that the brand metrics continue to sort of, you know, go in that direction, or at least stabilize. So it's done a really good job for the brand across the board. I think particularly in Australia, there was something like a 9% increase in appeal, which I think was a 5-year goal for Tourism New Zealand, and it happened in around about 5 or 6 months. So, you know, you don't really see things like appeal move that quickly, especially when you're going after.
Goodness
me.
That's really impressive.
15% increase in appeal in Australia.
15.
Yeah.
Hey, goodness me.
So yeah, I mean, Australia was amazing. We saw some of the best results we've ever seen following a campaign in Australia. You know, 15% increase in appeal, 54% increase in incidents. So that, you know, that for the Australian market, there's an extra 2.1 million Australians in the pool, you know, available and considering New Zealand as a holiday destination. And then preference, you know, went to an all-time high of 67%, which we'd never seen before. So yeah, it was incredible to look at the, you know, the by market metrics, as well as, you know, the fold up to what we were trying to achieve globally as well.
Yeah. So then the other thing, and this is the bit that I found out the other day, which is in the first 3 months of the campaign, which had quite a lot of the waiting in Australia, we saw an incredible amount of incremental bookings, sort of an additional 20,000 people. And that's not even measuring people kind of going away and doing it themselves. A lot of that is through sort of travel agents or online travel agents, which if you were to just take that number of people alone, that would be a pretty significant ROI, you know, into the many millions. So yeah, and as I sort of said, this is kind of like, we're still trying to paint the full picture of exactly how it's done across the year, but all signs are that it's been really positive and has had a, you know, massive influence on the brand. And I guess the one thing is that sign go, but people aren't coming right now. But I think with something like visiting a country, it's a much longer game. It's not like buying a beer. These things are things that people can quite often take a long time to consider. So it's quite important that your brand is in good shape for when this is all said and done.
Absolutely.
I mean, our booking windows are anything between, like, you know, 3 and 12 months, you know, of someone considering a holiday to actually booking it before they even turn up, you know. So we're talking like years of, I guess, of dreaming, you know, and potentially planning for a New Zealand holiday before they even book a ticket, and then eventually turn up. And that's why, I guess, you know, at the moment, my role in my head has turned, obviously, from this campaign to the position we're in at the moment, which is, okay, how do we keep, you know, New Zealand's brand alive in the hearts and minds of people around the world whilst they can't book a ticket? You know, how do we make sure that when the borders do open, and when that chance does come again, that New Zealand is the top place that they want to go. So
that's right.
It doesn't stop just because our borders are closed.
No, well, we often talk in long and short-term effects of, you know, when it comes to effectiveness about, Peter Field will talk about protecting tomorrow's sales, and this is a classic example of, like, you physically can't sell any tickets right now, or you can't get people to book to come into the country, but you are future-proofing next year's sales and the year after and the year after that. So if there was ever a case for long-term brand building for the country, it's right now. So
absolutely.
Look, It's fantastic to listen to you both talk about the campaign, and congratulations, because it's clearly driven the success of the marketing endeavor to the next level. Just for people watching, we're always keen to ask both the client and the agency if there are any learnings about being a more effective advertising practitioner. And Brodie, you've got experience on both sides of the relationship. What would you say were sort of the key things that people should have front in mind when they're trying to develop effective advertising?
Who wants to go first?
I'm thinking. Sorry, I thought you were first.
I can. Yeah, I mean,
always defer to the client. Is
I can speak from my perspective. I don't know. I kind of come back to 4, really, really important things that I think. I talk about this concept of dirt, which is not it's not my original concept, but I think it really resonates with me. Which is, you have to be distinctive, you have to be interesting, you have to be relevant, and timely and of the moment, but at the heart of it, it has to be true. And I think for a nation brand, that is so important, that you're being true to who you are and the people that you're representing. This is us speaking on behalf of 5 million Kiwis, talking to the world about who we are and what we stand for. So to authentically kind of replicate that and bring that to life is so important. And this was a amazing concept. I remember turning to these guys at Special and going, are we sure we want to do this? We're signing ourselves up to 366 pieces of content, like one every day for an entire year. Are we all in this together? Like, are we doing this? To which I got, yes, absolutely, we're all in this together. And I don't know, for me, again, coming from that side and coming into this side, that feeling of partnership, and actually being in it together, owning those objectives together, deciding what they are together, fulfilling them together, and building on them and making it better the whole time, only comes through that sense of partnership. And I think that's really what we had here, what we have have had for the whole year. So that to me has made the campaign really effective. It's allowed us to kind of flex and change and do things differently, come up with a whole new sort of production model. Some people can spend $1 million on one piece of content. Well, we had to make 366, so that traditional approach to production wasn't going to work. Yeah. But we all agreed that we were in this together and that we were going to create this amazing campaign and make sure it was really, really effective in all of our markets. And that was what we did. And it's been phenomenal, actually, really amazing.
Thank you. That's well said. I love that dirt. I think it's a really nice thing for people to take away. It's distinctive, interesting, relevant, true. Is that right? Yeah. Excellent. I've not come across that before. It's great.
I'm going to struggle to follow this answer.
Sorry, I always have to highlight the learning outcomes for Paul Head. Learning outcome.
So I don't have anything as clever as that to say, but I've looked. There are lots of different things that I could say that I've learned from this, but I might go with one more emotional one and one more practical one. I think the emotional one is just like back yourself. I think when you encounter or work on an idea like this, there will be lots of times when you're trying to do something really ambitious where, you kind of end up being derailed slightly, or you wonder if you can pull it off. And I think Brodie would say the exact same thing as me. There were many, many times in this where it was like, oh, are we really going to do this? Are we actually trying to make a film for every single day of the year? And I guess what I just kind of needed to keep on telling myself is that I genuinely think that this is the right thing to do. And I think sometimes the self-doubt that kind of creeps in with campaigns like this can often end up killing them. But I guess for me, I really believed in it, and I think Brodie really believed in it. I think a lot of people really did, across the board. And I guess for me, everyone kind of backed themselves on it, and I don't think you could have pulled something like this off without having that kind of conviction. So that's the kind of more emotive one. I think the more practical one, I guess, for me, well, not for me, I think for people in general, stakeholder management is quite often seen as being perhaps a little bit of a chore, you know, something that kind of is a tick the box thing. I think we treated it very, very, very differently, which is, one, we need to get people really excited about this, and two, we need them to help us pull it off. And, you know, I encounter things on a daily basis where you have discussions about managing the stakeholders, and just the more I think about it, you know, I know that is part and parcel of what we have to do, but I think sometimes it's actually about exciting the stakeholders, encouraging them to participate in what you're doing and making them feel like it's theirs too. And ultimately, you know, New Zealand is the country's brand. It's not just Tourism New Zealand's. And I really feel like across the board, everyone who kind of touched it did really feel like that they were genuinely being asked to participate in it and help out, rather than it just being an FYI.
Yeah, no, well said. I think that's a really good point, isn't it? It's about enthusing people about the role of the advertising and the importance of the advertising, and because everyone's got an opinion, and everyone's a marketing director, aren't they, Brodie? You know, it's like my mother said this. She doesn't know anything about advertising. She doesn't even live in New Zealand. But but I think it's well said that actually taking the time to demonstrate the rigor and the excitement and the thoroughness with which you've gone about what you're doing, because especially in the case of Tourism New Zealand, you're dealing with taxpayers' money, you know, and therefore you owe a degree of accountability. But it's more than that, as you say, Rory. It's about contagious enthusiasm for the opportunity. And I think that's really well put. And look, thank you guys for taking the time out to talk about. I want to thank you on behalf of the team of 5 Million for doing such an amazing job. I'm a born again New Zealander, as you know. You know,
so am I.
I remember seeing 100% Pure in its early days on the London Tube and thinking, God, anything's got to be better than, you know, Bakerloo Tube Station on a rainy Wednesday as a publicist on Baker Street. But luckily for me, I had my own mini advertising campaign in my fiancée, Janice. So I got to New Zealand. It took me about 2 years of consideration, I think, was my including a free one-off trip in which I did the Tongariro crossing. And then I finally made the decision to come here. But yeah, hopefully I'm upholding the welcome. So, but yeah, thanks guys. I really appreciate the chat. It's been phenomenal.
No worries. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Rory. Thank you very much, Brodie. And thank you so much, Murray, on behalf of the Comms Council.